Taoiseach, I understand that the Omicron variant is here in Ireland. You might take an opportunity in reply to confirm what you know in relation to this. I think it's important that the House has updated this immediately in relation to this. Obviously, it's a very serious issue for us, not unsurprising, but very serious. I want to raise with you today the two letters issued by the Department of Education and the CMO in relation to school masks in primary schools, because there is utter confusion in relation to how this is done. The communications around it was nothing short of diabolical. We support public health advice. I have a son who's 10, a daughter who's 11, and a wife who's a primary school teacher. This protects teachers, it protects children. I appreciate that, and I support that. However, for 20 months you've been saying schools are safe. It took the government 5 days to make a decision on these new mask rules, but it gave schools 16 hours. 16 hours. The communications last night arrived after 6 o'clock when principals had finished. What sort of way is that to communicate with the principals of Ireland in primary schools and boards of management? We've gone through so much over the last year and 3 quarters in relation to dealing with this virus and trying to keep the education system going. Surely there should have been a communications process whereby principals were engaged with, unions were engaged with, but also children were engaged with. There's a huge difference from a development point of view between a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old. This can't just happen overnight, and that's what's been asked. I understand, despite questions from my colleague Anna Reardon, the Minister has now clarified that there will be a couple of days' grace. But ultimately, this is mandatory, and that is fine. But the communications process around it is frankly diabolical. Principals are left this morning at school gates wondering what they're meant to do. And the same tomorrow. Communications issues in relation to the volumes of kids who come from non-national backgrounds, for instance. You can't just do a light switch like that and think that this is going to operate perfectly. It's not. And there are issues in relation to GPs can't be taking up their time giving out exemptions for masks for kids in school. They're wrecked. Issues in relation to where are they going to get all the masks if they have to give more masks to kids during school, because they'll need multiple masks, I would suspect, during school. And also issues in relation to mixed classes, for instance. But the real issue I want to ask you is this, most importantly. What's the legal basis for it? And have you guaranteed that principals are legally protected here? That if they refuse entry for a kid into school, are they legally protected by this state? Because I note that the PDF that went out had no signature on it and wasn't on headed paper. I want to know, given that this is non-statutory guidance, or has it a legislative basis? If someone rocks up to the High Court and challenges this, will you defend the principal who will be the person who will be taken? This is a critical question. The principals of Ireland are concerned about this, genuinely concerned. I'm not making this up. They've been on to me, on. Really concerned. What happens if somebody challenges them in relation to this? Are they legally protected?
Taoiseach.
First of all, I think I accept what the Deputy said in terms of this being a public health measure that he welcomes, that he accepts, and you also said that you accept that it's a requirement, and you accept that too, and you said it's fine. So I do accept that in good faith, and it is a public health measure, and the Chief Medical Officer, Deputy Chief Medical Officer have expressed to Government their deep concern about the very rapid increase in the incidence of COVID in 5 to 11-year-olds, and critically also in what they say are the parents of those 5 to 11-year-olds as well. And that as part of the general measures of reducing community transmission and the volume of incidences in the community, that this is now a measure that they're recommending, and also to protect education itself and our schools. And of course, the idea of children wearing masks is not new. You're correct in saying in terms of developmental differences between 9-year-olds and 13-year-olds and 14 and 15, but nonetheless, mask wearing has come in for over 13-year-olds, has been a requirement and hasn't generated any huge issues. I understand maybe in a legal case or two which didn't hold up, but I don't have the details of that here, but I can check that for you and come back to you in respect of what happened at post-primary level. But suffice to say, it has been a requirement at post-primary level now for quite some time, and has operated on the ground. And also, I would say that there's clear directions in terms of mixed classes as to what is to happen, and in terms of the guidelines. As ever in education, the school management know their community and will engage with their community and will be obviously very attentive to the needs of students and individual students. Obviously, in terms of special needs children, there won't be a requirement if it's not suitable and so on, and nor should there be for children with special needs, where masks could be difficult and challenging. And also for children that may have issues with masks. I think there has to be common sense, discretion, practical approach to this. And I think in the main, there will be. Overall, we have to look at this as a collective society. There has to be a societal response. That's how we've got through this to now, because where you have high incidence in the community, we have to take a community-wide approach to reducing that level of incidence. And if you look at, for example, that's very much the case in vaccination. We now have 93.5% of over 18s vaccinated. Yet one of the problems is when you look at what's happening in hospital, 50% of I say 48 is it percent of hospitalizations are still unvaccinated. 50% in ICU are unvaccinated, and 2% partially vaccinated. So you can see the huge. The point I'm making there is that community-based response is crucial. It also applies to mask wearing, and it is challenging, Deputy. I appreciate that, and it's not a place I'm entirely 100% comfortable with. And as a person, as a parent, as a former teacher myself, I'm very much alive to the different situations that can apply in different schools and different localities and so on.
Yeah,
different backgrounds. And I think that we have to be sensitive to all of that.
Deputy Kelly.
Not being comfortable with it is one thing. Not being legal is another. I'm concerned here. There's a big difference between primary and secondary schools. Many people will have followed all the guidance but would have an objection to this. I don't, but some do. I want to know the principals are protected. We have trawled and looked to see what is the legal basis to cover principals and boards of management here. We can't find any. It's on non-headed notepaper. There is no signature on it. It's a PDF sent out. So what is the legal basis here that protects principals and boards of management? If somebody is not allowed into school, how does it affect their attendance record? There is a legal basis in law as regards kids having to go to school. What happens here? The kids have a constitutional right to an education, legal right to an education. So I'm asking you once more, for principals and boards of management, are they legally protected, and what is the legal basis under which this is operating? We as a legislator need to know that.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Principals and teachers administering public health policy in the middle of a global pandemic will be protected. Okay? And just want to make the point, that's a policy position. In the middle of a global pandemic where school principals and management are applying public health policy, they will be protected, Deputy. And I think I want to pay tribute to principal teachers. I want to pay tribute to teachers across the length and breadth of the country who collectively, and all of us in this House, agree that we want children in schools. Because, just hear me out please, because developmentally it triumphs everything in my view. Because I think the developmental needs of a child are regressed or are undermined if they're not in school and if they're out of school for any prolonged period. So that's the context here, and that's the public health advice. In order to protect that central objective, are recommending the wearing of masks, and the CMO and the Deputy CMO are of a view that this will help in the reduction of overall transmission and will protect the schools and the education system. The obvious legal framework is that from a public health policy or fundamental obligation, hear me out please, is to protect the public from this virus. Now, I'm not going to arbitrate what would transpire if people take challenges and so on like that.
Can't answer the question because there is
well, I dispute that. You're not a constitutional lawyer. And I would accept the point, and I can see the, I can see the conflicting arguments that will ultimately transpire. But I do accept your bona fides in terms of you saying this is the right thing to do. And that's what and I agree with that. Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
please, can we hear Deputy McBarry, please? Deputy, please. Deputy McBarry has the floor. Please. Please, please. Please.